Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none who get left.
We are all evil in some form or another. I am not guilty.
Rachel Pernosky's story isn't so much about her death as much as it is about the life that she was living before it was stolen from her. In 2013, she was only 18 years old, which is on the edge of adulthood, but she was already facing responsibilities and burdens that were far beyond her years. Living in Mission, BC, which is a Fraser Valley community just east of Vancouver, a small enough community that people knew each other's names at the grocery store, but large enough to have possibilities for someone young and ambitious like Rachel, who was a free spirit that enjoyed connecting with people, remembered as someone that was silly and funny and liked to laugh, but also as a loving single teenage mom just trying to figure her stuff out. By 2013, she was already the mom of a young son who had recently turned 1, and taking care of him gave her days structure and purpose, and her family often remarked about how devoted she was to him. Her son's father remained involved, and Rachel tried to balance co-parenting with the ordinary challenges of being a teenage mother, still trying to figure out what she wanted to be on her own as an independent teenager. Her home life had been a little bit complicated in some other ways. Rachel's parents had separated a number of years earlier, and she had siblings, including a sister named Brittany, but she also had some half-siblings with whom her relationships with them kind of varied. And among them was one of her half-brothers, Matthew Pernosky, who was several years older than her. And that relationship had been a bit strained, to say the least. Years earlier, Matthew had sexually assaulted Rachel when he was a teenager and she was still a child. And he was convicted of that assault, so good for her for having the balls to report it from within a family structure. I mean, that had to have been super difficult, and when you're young like that, I think it's even harder because you feel like you need your parents in your life, and when one of your parents is also the parent of the person that victimized you, I can't even imagine what that trauma was like for Rachel. Anyways, Matthew received probation for that, which seems pretty lenient to me, and it was a shadow that hung over the family and something that Rachel carried with her, but she really tried to move forward from it. So just take a moment to imagine. Rachel is 18 years old, and if you remember those days, and she's not just being a good and caring mother to a son as a teenager, she's also working to co-parent her son like a grown-up would. I mean, just think of how many actual grown-ups can't manage that. And then she's also working on trying to get over the trauma of a sexual assault by her own half-brother. So this is a young woman that I find quite remarkable in her wisdom and just zenness beyond her years. By early 2013, life seemed to be setting a little rhythm for Rachel. She was still young. She's still trying to figure her things out, but she had her son. She had a circle of friends, family support, and her posts on Facebook and social media are pretty normal for a woman her age. There's jokes, casual updates about her life, and of course, tons of photos of her little peanut. And her presence online was steady enough that within a day or two, you would start to think that something was up if she had stopped posting, which happened in March of 2013. And it definitely wasn't like Rachel to go even a day without checking in with someone, whether it was family or a friend. On March 16th, 2013, Rachel received a call from her half-brother Matthew. He was the one that had sexually assaulted her a few years ago. And he was blah, blah, blahing about how he wanted to apologize for everything that he had done and just kind of talk it out. Now, Rachel being open to forgiveness and wanting to move on, and probably the most mature 18-year-old that I've ever heard of, allowed him to stop by that evening. And while he was there, Rachel texted a couple of times with a friend of hers saying that the visit was going good, but it was emotional, but that she was getting really tired and probably very emotionally drained. And of course, she had a child that she was trying to take care of. I'm not sure if he was there that night or visiting with his father, which, based on the reporting, it sounds like that was the case. So anyway, she texted her friend that she kind of hoped that he would be going home soon. And the next morning, Brittany wasn't able to get a hold of her. Brittany is her sister. And someone that she always answered her phone to. So alarm bells went off pretty much right away with everyone because Rachel was, she was devoted to her little guy. She had no history of being flaky or disappearing on anyone. And so when Brittany let herself into Rachel's apartment, her purse, her credit cards, and even her cell phone was still there. So Brittany at the time told City News, quote, "That was the first thing that made us all realize something was wrong. Rachel didn't just take off, not like that," end quote. So her family reported her missing, and the police took the report seriously from the very beginning. Rachel's age, yes, meant she was technically an adult, but under the circumstances, like her devotion to her son, the fact that her belongings had been left behind, and her sudden silence on all social media were red flags to the police. So Mission RCMP officers began checking her usual places that she went to, talking to friends, canvassing the area. And at the same time, family members were also launching their own frantic search. They're calling hospitals, they're checking in with people who might have seen her. They are plastering missing persons posters all across Mission and anywhere nearby. And unfortunately, 3 days later, the frantic search kind of ended in heartbreak. On March 19th of 2013, Rachel's body was discovered in Chilliwack, which is about 30 kilometers east of Mission. She had been left in a steep terrain off of Chilliwack Mountain near Old Orchard Road. And the area was pretty difficult to access. There was a wooded embankment where searchers would have had no reason to look there unless they thought that that's maybe where she was. And it was clear immediately that foul play had been involved. 18-year-olds do not end up in remote, steep terrain on their own. So Rachel's case was then transferred from missing persons investigations to the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, which is known as IHIT in BC, which is the regional unit that handles suspicious deaths across all of British Columbia's lower mainland. For her family, the discovery of her body confirmed what they had feared pretty much from the very beginning, that she was never going to come home again. So the grief for them was immediate and completely overwhelming, but was also accompanied by a lot of anger and questions about who could have done this and why. And the community in itself was in shock and were grief-stricken about it. Mission was not really a place where young women routinely were murdered, and the brutality of that really hit people hard. She was a mother. Candlelight vigils were organized. Friends and family would gather to remember her as she had lived, not as she had died.
My sister's best friend, and she was like a little sister to me. She was always coming in our door just laughing, and it would light up the place. She has a great laugh that I'll never forget. She was friendly. She just acts like she was part of the family.
She would be very touched to see how much everyone cared and how much everyone loved her. And we know she's looking down on us, smiling. Oh no, we so much. And she would just be very touched to know that everyone is here tonight for her. We all love you, Rachel, and you're going to be in our hearts forever.
There was a picture on Facebook of Rachel with her baby boy. And I just want you to know that this community's heart's breaking. This is just sickening what this world is coming to. That, we do have to band together as a community. And I just want to say to the family, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Meanwhile, investigators began the painstaking work of trying to figure out who had killed her. So they combed through her social media accounts, searching for any kind of recent interactions or clues. And they noted that her online presence had gone quiet the night that she disappeared, something that they considered rather unusual enough to highlight that publicly. So they interviewed friends, tracked her movements, and looked into anyone that she might have met with on the night of March 16th, which meant that they examined her phone, which of course contained the last text messages that she had sent to her friend about Matthew's visit to her. So almost immediately, Rachel's half-brother Matthew came under some suspicion. He had a criminal history with her, and he was among one of the last people known to have seen her alive. Still, suspicion is not the same as proof. What they needed was evidence that was strong enough to bring charges that were going to hold up in court. In the early days of the investigation, that evidence wasn't there yet. There was no eyewitness testimony, there was no murder weapon found, and no forensics evidence strong enough to tie him to the crime. So the case, although it was not considered cold, began to kind of stall. Now, in the meantime, Rachel's family tried hard to navigate the whole situation. Her sister Brittany became a vocal advocate, speaking to the press whenever she could about Rachel's life and demanding justice for her. She was the victim. She was the only victim, end quote. So for Brittany and the rest of the family, the waiting, of course, is just agonizing because they knew who they believed was responsible, but they had to kind of wait for the justice system to catch up to that. In the months after her murder, the community of Mission grieved with the family. Vigils wound up turning into anniversaries into milestones that the family just never really wanted to face. It wasn't something they wanted to do. Rachel's son grew older without his mom, and her absence was just kind of everywhere in all the family gatherings, in her sister's daily life, and in these milestones that the little boy was, he learned to walk and to talk without her being there to cheer him on. And for the police, the investigation remained active, but they knew that they needed more evidence. So behind the scenes, they began considering a controversial tactic that Canadian law enforcement sometimes uses in particularly difficult cases, a Mr. Big operation, which we haven't talked about a Mr. Big in a while. It's it's expensive, it's often subject to scrutiny by the courts, but without it, they just thought they might never get Rachel's killer, who they also believed to be Matthew. So in the months after her body had been discovered, her family, living with these unanswered questions, who believed they knew who had taken her life from her, Matthew, but again, having that belief is not the same as proof. And in our justice system here in Canada, suspicion is not enough to bring charges. So the prosecutors needed evidence that would stand up in court and that would also withstand cross-examination and the appeals. And without it, a charge for murder could just collapse, leaving Rachel's family with no justice at all. So the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, or IHIT, kept that case active, and they went through her, the last text messages, her phone records, her social media interactions all again, and they also scrutinized Matthew's movements around that time, but the physical evidence was still really thin. Her body had been left in a steep wooded area. Forensic recovery was really challenging in that area. There were no eyewitnesses. No neighbors had heard anything. She didn't see her leave with anyone. So it was as if the trail just kind of ended the moment she disappeared from her house. So behind closed doors, the investigators began discussing this Mr. Big operation. So as a refresher, or for those that are maybe new here, welcome, by the way. This is a uniquely Canadian investigative technique. It's controversial, but it is legal under some strict conditions. So in a Mr. Big sting, undercover officers pose as members of this powerful criminal organization, and they gradually will befriend the person that is the suspect, offer them money, some camaraderie, and this sense of belonging in this illegal gang. And then eventually they introduce this figure known as Mr. Big. I don't think they actually call him Mr. Big, but he's the supposed leader of this organization. And to be fully accepted, the person is told that you have to confess to any past crimes. Like, the organization cannot afford to have any secrets hidden from them. Critics of this argue that Mr. Big confessions can be coerced, that somebody who's desperate or lonely, they may invent some stories to gain acceptance. And the courts have kind of gone back and forth on these, but they allow these operations now as long as the confessions are corroborated by independent evidence. So that's why they always have holdback evidence in these kind of cases, that something that nobody would know about except for the police and the killer. So for iHit, it was one of the few tools that they had left, because without a confession, Rachel's murder might never be actually solved in the courts. So the operation began quietly with undercover officers approaching Matthew under this guise of petty criminal opportunities, which of course he was into. They gave him some small jobs, some cash, kind of this feeling of being part of something bigger that could lead to bigger things for him. And over the weeks and months, they built his trust with him. And then came this meeting with Mr. Big. And it was with this meeting that Matthew finally admitted what everybody had long suspected, that he had killed his half-sister Rachel. Now, according to court records and reporting by the Abbotsford News, Matthew had told the undercover officers that on March 16th, 2013, he went to Rachel's house to apologize for this sexual abuse he had committed against her years earlier. And at first, the conversation it was emotional, but it was calm. But Matthew, for some reason, grew angry. Probably she wasn't taking his apology all that well, and said that she was acting like a victim and that his anger had escalated into violence. He struck her, pinned her down, and then suffocated her by covering her mouth and nose with his hand. But the horror did not end there. Matthew admitted that after he had killed Rachel, he took her body back to his home in Abbotsford, where there he sexually assaulted her lifeless body before disposing of it in Chilliwack, where she was later found. And to cover his tracks, he attempted to send some misleading messages from Rachel's phone, hoping to create the illusion that she was still alive. He also disposed of her keys and some other personal items to distance himself from the crime. So it doesn't sound like the text messages about the conversation going good but emotional that had come from Rachel's phone to her friend were actually from her. For the investigators, the confession was chilling, but it was crucial. It matched the details that they already knew, details that had not been made public at that time, like the location of her body, the description of her last text messages that she supposedly sent, and the time frame. And these were things that only the killer would know. So the Mr. Big sting had given them what they needed, which was a direct admission backed by corroborating evidence. So in 2016, which is 3 years after Rachel's murder, the police arrested Matthew Pernosky and then charged him with second-degree murder. They also considered 2 counts of indignity to a human body, given his admission of sexually violating her after her death, but those charges, for whatever reason, were later stayed.
We are very grateful and relieved that an arrest has been made in connection with Rachel's murder. Rachel was a mother, daughter, sister, and a friend. Rachel's absence from our lives has left many broken hearts and great devastation. She is missed and remembered each and every day. She was a strong and beautiful young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Our sweet Rachel will never have the opportunity to live out her dreams. She didn't deserve this. Her senseless murder has left behind a young boy who will never know his mother and will one day need answers to questions that he should never have to ask. We would like to thank the investigators at iHit who have worked tirelessly to achieve justice for Rachel. It is excruciating to not have Rachel in our lives any longer, and what makes this more difficult is knowing that an estranged family member has been charged with her murder. There are no words to describe the pain we are feeling or the difficulty we are facing with processing all of this. For this, we ask for privacy, and we thank you for allowing us to tell you about who Rachel was in life and the deep void we all feel with her gone. You will never be forgotten, Rachel.
For Rachel's family, the arrest was relief, that justice was finally at least in motion, but it also meant sort of reliving the pain in public through hearing statements being read and just the really painfully slow process of the courts. So Matthew's trial was supposed to take place in 2018, but as it approached, he decided to plead guilty, which is a good thing. And so on May 28th, 2018, in New Westminster, he admitted to second-degree murder of killing his half-sister, Rachel. So there would be no trial. There was no cross-examination of him, no jury. And instead, the focus then was shifted to the sentencing. Now, in Canada, as you may know, second-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence. The key question with sentencing for that is the parole eligibility period. So the minimum number of years that a person has to serve before they can apply for their release. And so for second degree, it's usually a range from 10 to 25 years. Now, the Crown or the prosecutors, they argued for a much higher number, given the brutality of the crime and the betrayal of the family's trust. And then the defense said that, well, no, Matthew had his own troubled past, including claims that he had been sexually abused as a child himself, and they asked for leniency. The sentencing hearing itself was rather raw with emotion, as you can imagine. Rachel's family members gave their victim impact statements describing just the depth of their loss. Her mother spoke about the pain of losing a daughter at such a young age and a woman that had so much life ahead of her. Her sister had said in part, quote, Rachel was the victim. She was the only victim. Matthew's not the victim. He may depict himself as a victim in order to get sympathy, but he is not a victim. That's the bottom line, end quote. The judge, who was Justice Trevor Armstrong, he had to kind of weigh the evidence in this guilty plea and then, of course, the impact that it had on Rachel's family. He called Matthew's actions repulsive, which was a word that I think both captures the violence of the murder and the desecration of her body afterwards. So Armstrong sentenced Matthew to life in prison and a no chance of parole for 13 years. So he kind of split the difference in the middle there. But of course, he got credit for time served. So he would be eligible for parole in just over 11 years. Now, the two charges of indignity to a body were stayed. So it was just the murder conviction, which was the sole basis for his sentence. For Rachel's family, the sentence did bring a measure of closure, but it obviously could not heal the wound that they had. They knew that even a life sentence and his parole eligibility meant that there was a possibility that Matthew would one day walk free. One in the family said, quote, we know we'll never be fully free. It's the life sentence. But knowing he could apply for parole in 13 years, that's something we'll have to live with, end quote. And that is something that we all have to live with, is that you can get a life sentence, but there's always parole eligibility. Now, in the years since, Rachel has been remembered not for the violence that ended her life, but for the person that she was. And friends and family who described her, again, as someone who was warm, funny, and just totally devoted to her son. She's got social media pages that are dedicated to her memory of her with her son, and just living every day of life that she should have had stretched out in front of her. Her son, of course, is now growing up without his mother. He is the most enduring reminder of what was lost. He will never get to remember the sound of her laugh or the way she would tuck him into bed at night, but through stories that are being told by his family, he will know who she was, hopefully, who was a young woman who loved him fiercely and whose life was just cut short by someone she should have been able to trust. Like her story kind of highlights the resilience of some families that are shattered by violence. Her sister, Brittany, her mom, and others close to her, they have used this loss to continue to speak out, reminding people that behind every headline is a human being with dreams, their own flaws, and their own relationships. Rachel was not perfect, but she was ours, and she deserved to live. The sentence is actually not the end of the story. Like, their sentence is, it's a life sentence without her. It's a pain that can never be appealed. Yet the true measure of Rachel's story is not in the legal outcome that happened, but in the people who continue to say her name in mission, at all family gatherings, and of course in the heart of this little boy who will grow up hearing about how much his mom loved him. Rachel, she's remembered that way. She was more than a victim. She was not a headline. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, and a friend. And that was the murder of Rachel Pernosky. And I find this story absolutely horrible. I just can't get over how amazing Rachel sounds, being 18 years old and yet so much having her life together, even though she was still trying to figure herself out. She sounds like she was just a remarkable and amazing young woman. And I feel so much for the family's loss, and to have that person be somebody that everybody in the family should have been able to trust is horrific. Absolutely horrific what was done to her by her own half-brother. And I can't imagine what that part is also like for the family, to not only have the victim be part of the family that you've lost, but also have the perpetrator be part of that same family is just devastating beyond any measure. But I hope that I did Rachel's memory justice in saying her name and talking about her, because I know that the family really wants that. They want people to know who she really was. And she just sounds like she was remarkable, and somebody that the world is really lesser for not having around anymore. And with that, I'm going to be back again in another week with another horrible, awful case. In the meantime, you know what to do. And as always, thank you so much for listening and for watching.